right, let's testify tonight.
Oh God, you've done so much for me. I'm grateful and overwhelmed here at your feet. And I could stay here forever, Lord, but you call me to something more. And I hear you say that you have a plan to use every broken woman and man to display just how good you are. We are your living pieces of art. What good does it do to hide away when all of my scars are a picture of grace? All right. So I will testify of the power of God. Tell the world of the hope I have found. For my body was broken, my heart was made whole, and that's too good to keep to myself. So I will testify of the power of God. Oh, do you believe it? Has He done it for anyone else? I said, has He done it for anyone else? 'Cause the God that I serve, He's always at work. Has He done it for anyone else? So come on and testify of the power of God. Come on and tell the world of the hope we have found. For our body was broken, our hearts were made whole, and that's too good to keep to yourself. Come on and testify of the power of God. This is my story, this is my song, praising my Savior all the day long. I'm gonna testify. Somebody testify your voice. This is my. So I'm gonna testify. Somebody testify. Come on, take it up. Jesus, my champion, the victor of grace, the only one worthy of all of my praise. Yeah. So come on and testify. Oh, somebody lift Him high. Come on, testify of the power of God. I will tell the world of the hope I have found. Oh, for my body was broken, my heart was made whole, and that's too good to keep to myself. So I will testify of the power of God. Sing it. Oh, my body was broken, my heart was made whole, and that's too good to keep to myself. So I will testify of the power of God. Oh, let's do that right now, Murfreesboro.
And good morning, everybody. Hope that everyone is doing well. I see Alex Bogey is first in the chat today. So good to see Alex. And anybody that is currently lurking or joins us later, welcome. Hope that all of you are doing well. So, a couple of things. First of all, yes, I am still working on getting my life into such a place as that I can start producing more YouTube content than just doing a live stream once a week. And I'm getting dangerously close to reaching that point. I'm truly, truly hoping that it will be soon. I have a surgery that I'm waiting for that it was supposed to be last week, but then it got bumped up, so I don't know when it's going to happen exactly, but that's a big thing that's coming. And of course, the financial stuff is the biggest hurdle, is that I need to get to a point where I don't have to drive constantly when I am not sleeping. So working on that, and with the help of my lovely wife, getting closer on that front. So I am cautiously optimistic about all that. But in the meantime, I'm continuing, and one of the things, because I do plan on producing content on both the Salty channel and on this channel. And on this channel, one of the things I'm going to be looking at are various arguments that atheists repeatedly make online. And the interesting thing, and I know I've said this before, but it bears repeating because I think it's vitally important, is that there are no actual arguments for atheism. And when I say that, of course, some people are like, what are you talking about? You were just talking about how you were going to talk about arguments from atheists. Well, there are lots of arguments from atheists, but none of them are for atheism. And they're not even truly against theism. I understand that many atheists will posit that because atheism is not a positive claim, that there's no argument to be made for it. However, if that is the case, then you do need to make an argument against the positive claim that you are attempting to, rebut. And the problem there is that every argument that I've heard is usually an argument that is, we'll just say, a little too specific. For example, what just popped up in the Q&A chat, where Marion says, atheists might argue that God's sending people to hell across the world for not believing in Jesus defeats the point of the gospel, because John 3:16 mentions the entire world. So they would believe. So that is neither an argument for atheism or against theism. At best, that is an argument against Christianity. But in all honesty, it would only be an argument about God's character, that God himself is kind of a jerk, right? If God loves the world so much, why is he sending people to hell or something like that? And that's not an argument against theism. That's an argument against the idea of a particular Christian interpretation. So we need to be very careful about if I am, let's say that I'm trying to think of another topic that might be debated, but let's say we're debating on conservatism versus liberalism. And the conservative puts out an opening statement about how preserving the essence of the Constitution would be a boon to the country because of how well it's laid out, and blah, blah, blah. So then the liberal then focuses on, but prohibition was a really bad idea. So is that an argument against conservatism, or is that an argument against prohibition? And we see the same thing kind of here. They're not making an argument against the belief in God or gods, and they're certainly not making an argument for the belief that no God or gods exist. They're only making an argument that John 3:16 seems a little absurd to them. And I hope that that addresses where you think you say there. Now, as far as your actual question, as far as how does God sending people to hell does that defeat the purpose of John 3:16? I would say no, it does not, because we know that we get this idea, and it's rather frustrating. But we have this idea in modern culture that God is like this really, really pissed off dude who is more or less trying, he gets pissed off at people for not believing in him, and therefore casts them into this torture chamber where they will suffer for all eternity. And the problem with that is that that's not in the Bible. None of what I just said is in the Bible. That's all stuff that has come up in, well, just called Christian mythology around the Bible. But there's, God does not send people to hell because they don't believe in Jesus. And in fact, Jesus himself even says that he has not come to condemn anybody, but rather to save those that are already condemned. Because what condemns us is not a lack of belief in Jesus. What condemns us is our sin. And we are all guilty of sin. And therefore, we are all living in a state of condemnation because, well, we're all guilty. However, what John 3:16 is saying is, well, but God loved the world so much that anybody who is willing to believe in Jesus, and that doesn't mean believe that he exists, just so atheists are clear. What they're talking about is believing in him, as in taking his word seriously, following him, and following his commands to the best of their abilities. But if you are willing to believe in him, that you would not be condemned, that you would in fact be saved and have everlasting life. And so John 3:16 is a reprieve from the condemnation that we already deserve. Then we get into but wait a minute, what if you are born, raised, and died in outer Mongolia, and you have never in your entire life so much as heard of Jesus? Well, again, I think that it is very much implied by several things in Scripture that God is at his core, a just judge. And so while on the one hand, it is true that justice must be served if he is a just God, that also means that he will not judge those based on what they have no way of knowing. To put it another way, think about if, it is a crime, for example, to strike another person. We call it assault. And so, but what if you have a person who is experiencing a seizure and is violently shaking about and not in control of their body, and while they're violently shaking about, one of their legs connects to another person and hurts them? Is that assault? And of course, we would say no, that would not be classified as assault. And so, because we have a justice system that tries to mirror that justice of God, in that if you have no control over the circumstances, and there's no conceivable way that you could have had control over those circumstances, then you would not be held accountable for those circumstances. So, I hope that answers you as far as your John 3:16 question. Good question, though. Robert in the house, good to see you, buddy. Says shalom today. Shalom, shalom, Robert. I was playing Diablo Immortal. Do you still game much? It's available for desktop also. I haven't gamed much in the last couple of years, maybe primarily just due to lack of time. I've been meaning to, whenever I can, I want to get the latest expansion for Diablo 4 because they finally brought in the Paladin, and that's the character that I've been wanting to play since Diablo 4 released. So I may do that, but first things first. I need to get a couple more bills paid off before I think about that. Ervik in the house says, good morning. I hope you are doing well, my friend. And then Alex says, I personally just watch others play them on YouTube or other platforms. No patience for games anymore. I'll be honest with you, Alex. I've never been able to really get that into watching other people play games. I understand that. I mean, there's a huge market of that type of content. That's what Twitch was all about, or is all about. I assume Twitch is still out there. I used to stream on Twitch, and I just don't have the charisma to attract an audience while I'm playing, and I certainly don't feel like watching somebody else play because I'll just play myself. That's my thought anyway. My skill level may not be particularly spectacular, but I can still enjoy myself. You can treat it like a movie. Maybe you can. I can't. When I'm watching someone else playing a video game, I'm just thinking, yeah, I wouldn't do that, or I would do it differently, or wow, he's better than me, or he's not as good as me, or whatever. But it doesn't feel like a movie. I don't feel like I'm watching a story unfold. Because most video games, at least the video games that I play, most of the game is not storytelling. Most of the game is, action of some kind, and then the story bits come in the form of like cutscenes or whatever. Diablo Immortal is free to play. Also, one doesn't have to spend money in it. Available on mobile platforms. Yeah, I've heard of it. In fact, I remember when it was first launched, and a lot of us fans were really angry about it because we thought it was like a joke that Diablo, rather than coming out with a Diablo 4, they were going to launch a Diablo mobile game because that's where the money is. And that is true. I mean, mobile games are designed to trick you into spending money. That's, they give you just enough to where you can get to a certain point, and then you're like, oh, if only I had 7,500 more gold. Well, guess what? You can get 7,500 more gold for just 99 cents. And so you're like, okay, I'll do it this way. It's worth the 99 cents. It's a fun game to play. And then you play a little bit more. Oh, man, I just need about, 25,000 more gold. Well, guess what? You can get 25,000 gold for $1.99. And you're like, oh, okay, I'll do that. And then you play some more, and you're like, man, I just need about 50,000 gold. Well, you can get 50,000 gold for just $4.99. And the idea is to get you to nickel and dime yourself to the point where, you've spent more than you would spend on a AAA title. That's the general free-to-play model. The one free-to-play model that I truly appreciate is the kind of thing that we see in games like Path of Exile. With Path of Exile, there is no experience boost, no gold, no nothing like that that you can buy or sell. And instead, you basically can, what you buy is custom skins for your character, custom visual effects for your character's abilities. So, for example, if you have a character that shoots fireballs, you might be able to buy a little thing that turns the fireballs green and with sparkles or something. You can do all that kind of stuff. But you can't change the actual mechanics of the game through purchases. I do like that. That doesn't change the fact, however, that with games like Path of Exile, there is a huge black market in which people will pay real-world money for various items in order to get ahead in the game. That's a violation of the terms of service of the game, but the designers and developers of the game turn a blind eye to it because they like it. And I don't agree with that. I think if you're going to have an auction house in the game, you should just have an auction house. You shouldn't have people doing some kind of black market interchange where they're spending money to get orbs so that some random character comes up and gives you the orbs in the game. That's just... I don't like it. Robert says, I progressed pretty far in Diablo Immortal without spending any money. Well, that's good. And don't get me wrong. If you've enjoyed Diablo Immortal, that's fine. I'm not, from what little I've seen of Diablo Immortal, it just didn't feel like my kind of thing. In fact, Diablo 4, I haven't, I've struggled with quite a bit because the so-called open-ended world of Diablo 4, some of the design elements of it make the game, in my opinion, a little bit less fun to play. But yeah, it's I haven't, but I haven't spent any real time playing games in a while. But priority always goes to the theological question, so I will come back to the chat in a bit. But right now, Marion once again asks a question. Says, okay, so if the multiverse theory is real and God didn't make everything in one universe, would that make any sense as an argument against theism? Okay, so the multiversal theory is an interesting one. And the funny thing about multiverse, okay, so I'll start with, is that an argument for atheism or against theism? And then I'll get into the argument itself. The first part, is it an argument for atheism? No, it's simply an argument for, or it's not even an argument, it's a hypothesis about the structure of the universe itself, not necessarily a argument that the universe is God-free, so to speak. It's only a potential universal origin story, but that doesn't mean there's no God. It just means that maybe you might be able to argue that it's not. It's an argument that God didn't create this universe specifically. However, you do run into the obvious problem, but well, no, I'll get into that in a second. But the short version is no, because the multiverse theory, which I use that term very lightly, it's not a theory, it's just a hypothesis at this point. But the multiversal hypothesis is not a statement about theology at all. It's simply about the nature of the universe. Trying to use the multiverse as an argument against theism might be possible if there was some supporting evidence for the multiverse, but right now there isn't. There's literally no evidence. outside of just, hey, wouldn't that be a neat idea? And that could explain a few things. So it's not an argument that God doesn't exist, and it's certainly not an argument that there are no gods. However, is there an answer as far as from the theistic viewpoint? Like if somebody puts forth the idea that the multiverse explains everything that God explains, right, as far as the origin of the universe and why the universe is fine-tuned and the insane odds against life evolving or whatever. And if I were trying to address that argument specifically, I would say, well, first of all, you run into the problem that there is zero evidence for a multiverse. The multiverse is an idea that people have come up with, in some cases, I think, in a bad faith way, or maybe perhaps a better non-scientific way, in that science or science, people who believe in scientism, the idea that science can explain everything, many of them will accuse theists of basically being counter to science by having a conclusion and then looking at the facts and trying to put together facts that support their conclusion. But that's exactly what some scientists like Krauss and others are doing as well, is they're basically trying, their conclusion is there is no God, and so then they try to come up with ways to try and explore or create a system in which God is unnecessary. But even if I granted you, for hypothetical purposes, that there is a multiverse, that still doesn't explain away God, because you still have the question of, well, where did the multiverse come from? What kicked it off? Why does it exist at all? How many of these universes are there? And the problem is that if there's an infinite number of universes, which is what most people I try to argue, because the idea is that every possible combination would exist. We just happen to be in the combination that best fits our existence. But if that's true, if even, but then you get many atheists, in fact, most atheists will concede that the existence of a God is possible, just not probable. But in an infinite number of universes, well, that actually becomes an argument for theism, doesn't it? Because if God is possible, God exists in at least one of those universes. But here's the problem. If God is truly a transcendent being, as we believe, then if God exists in one universe, then he must exist in all. So I think that the idea of a multiverse makes the probability of God stronger, not weaker. Thank you once again, though. And I know you keep saying I can call you, is that Marin? Like Marin County? And I'm just terrible with that. Miss Moneypenny in the house saying, hello, how you doing, Penny? I hope you are well today. And Bradley says, not free to play games cost $100 now, and each expansion pack costs almost as much as well. So if I spend $100 on a free play game, I'm still saving money, aren't I? Well, it depends on how good the game is, and I will tell you, now granted, I'm an old man, but I have never spent $100 on a single game. And I even have a few of those, special edition, limited, get the, porcelain figure or toilet paper or whatever that comes with it. I have somewhere over here a Diablo 3 box that came with the limited edition of that one. And that was probably the most expensive game I ever bought, and that was in the like $80 range. And while I would say this, you're right in that if you spent less than $100 on Diablo Immortal versus spending $100 on Diablo 4, then you're saving money on Diablo Immortal. But if the game, but the flip side of that, free-to-play games tend to be built on free-to-play budget. AAA titles are built on AAA budgets. So it would be like saying, hey, why should I pay $10 to go see Avengers Endgame when I could spend $5 and watch Sense and Sensibility? Well, okay, but Sense and Sensibility isn't Avengers Endgame. See my point? Robert then says, I know in the Battlestar Galactica reboot, religion was used a lot in it, where the humans believed in multiple gods, where the Cylons believed in only one god. Do you think that ruined the reboot in some ways? Absolutely not. I think that it enhanced the reboot. I know that some people might find the use of religion in a fictional sense to be distasteful, and if you do, I certainly understand. If you don't want to watch that, I have no beef with you on that. But for me, I kind of liked the idea of what if, the polytheistic ways of early man continued on. What would we be? And I think that's kind of a look at what the colonies are in the reimagined Battlestar Galactica. And the interesting thing about the Cylons believing in only one god is that the Cylons are machines. And they think like machines, not emotionally, but with just cold, hard logic and rationality, which, of course, some atheists hate that machines would be religious because they think that's irrational. But I think religion is hardly irrational. But the interesting thing there is that the logical conclusion is that if a deity exists, if any deities exist, logically there should only be one. A monotheistic system is the only form of theism that, in my opinion, is rational, because a pantheon of gods, while makes for more interesting stories, for sure, the simple problem is you run into the problem. Then where did all the gods come from? If they're just living, and most of the gods that you see in these pantheons are created beings themselves. In fact, many of them have stories of how they were conceived and where they came from and all that, going all the way back to usually you have, just a couple of origin gods that somehow gave birth to either the universe itself or, the pantheon. And, but the simple truth is that if you run into a very real problem of having, if you have more than one god, then you have to have an origin for these gods. If there is only one god, one source for everything that is outside of time, space, and all that, then it becomes a little bit more reasonable to suggest that this god is eternal. And then of course you have other weird ideas on how to explain the origins of God as well. Alex says, regarding the multiverse, there have been some anecdotal stories, like a woman in Spain waking up one day and suddenly she's working at a different department, and everyone thought she'd always worked there. Well, in the Mandela type things and stuff like that, people say, oh, it was you hopping realities and that kind of thing. But you know what? I would say that the woman in Spain waking up one day, suddenly she's working in a different department, had some kind of limited amnesia, or some kind of delusion. And I don't know. And here's the problem. anecdotes about people having weird experiences. Look, if you look hard enough, you will find people that will swear up and down all sorts of crazy things that we know are not true. So just because someone says, I swear I worked in a different department, that could just be faulty memory. So, in other words, we would need more than a person in a country had a feeling. That means nothing. You need hard data. Where the original Battlestar Galactica hinted at religious things, such as the Lords of Kobol mentioned once in a while. Oh, the original actually was steeped in Mormon theology. It's just most people didn't realize it. And in certain episodes, like for example, when Count Iblis, I think it's either Ibli or Iblis, when he shows up, that's right out of Mormon theology. When we see the angelic beings, they are right out of Mormon theology. And so and that's just because Glenn Larson, in my understanding, is an LDS. I don't know if he still is or not, but I know he was in the 70s. And he was the creator of the show. And so he wanted a show that highlighted so it's his Battlefield Earth, basically. I know, different religion, but you get the idea. Alex says, I love how season 3, I think of the new Battlestar, was an allegory for the Iraq insurgency, with the humans being the insurgents, blowing up police academy, UN, etc., giving the show an award. I'm not sure what award you're talking about, but no, season 3 was not an allegory for the Iraq insurgency. At least not as far as anything I've seen. The one thing that we saw with the suicide bombings and stuff, it was showing how far people will go if they truly believe in a cause, but then it asks the question, is there a moral line here? Is, in fact, doing that type of an attack go too far? Did Colonel Ty cross the line when he ordered people to blow themselves up to try and get at the Cylons? I think he clearly did. And we see the damage that it did to Ty. And the reaction around him. We did have a double in again, you're talking about Count Ibli, and he and the people in white that were on the really weird spaceships that were super advanced. They were what Mormons believe in, this interesting form of ascension, that you basically can become a god if you are good enough. And so they were showing the people that were all in white and on those super advanced spaceships, they were basically, that's what happens if you're a good Mormon, I guess. The Jane in Spain comes from a higher plane. Bradley says, there's a very high chance we all live in a simulation like the Matrix. My question is, are we still of God's design or just a simulation of it? So the simulation argument is an interesting one. So now let me say this. The simulation argument, again, is not an argument for atheism, nor is it an argument against theism. It is neither. It is simply another hypothesis about the state of the universe, and in this case, that the universe is in fact a computer simulation. And the argument pretty much goes as follows. Premise 1, computer technology will eventually reach a point where you could create sentient programs that are unaware that they are in a simulated environment. 2, if that is the case, it is people would run these various programs. In fact, there would probably be millions of said programs being run at any given time. Therefore, it is millions of times more likely that we are actually experiencing a simulation than the real universe. However, I reject premise one. I do not believe that there is such a thing as a sentient, sapient program. And I do not believe that it is possible. I don't care what people say about AI. First of all, AI is not intelligent. It is artificial, but it's just an algorithm. And the AIs are just algorithms designed specifically to try to fool you. Let's see. Don't you remember Colonel Ty blowing up the Cylon Police Academy? Sure I do. But that has nothing directly to do with Iran. He wasn't, and so I get that, you know, you have a rather unique viewpoint on geopolitical events, particularly in the Eastern Hemisphere, but the Battlestar Galactica was never intended to be an allegory for anything other than humanity as a whole. It did a little too much LDS in the 70s. He absolutely did. Though many have said that the Suliban and Enterprise were supposed to be an allegory for the Taliban. Yes, that is somewhat true. Not that the Suliban were necessarily the Taliban specifically, but that the attack on Earth in the final episode of season 2 of Enterprise was actually meant to be their response to 9/11. That is the Federation's 9/11, if you will. And so that would, by default, put the Suliban in the position of the Taliban. But I don't think the Suliban were meant as a direct allegory of the Suliban, or of the Taliban. It's funny, the names are kind of similar, though. The existence of a matrix, in my opinion, would be more like evidence for a demiurge rather than the biblical God. I'm not sure what a demiurge is. I've not heard that term before. I admit when I'm ignorant, so let's look this up. Never heard that term. A demiurge is a philosophical and religious concept of a lesser divine creator or an artisan figure responsible for the fashioning and maintaining the physical union. Okay, that makes sense. So yeah, that would be only to a point. So for example, if we were in the Matrix, if you were trying to make the simulation argument, if we were in the Matrix, and I've made this argument too, is that is actually an argument for theism. But it is an argument for a very odd form of polytheism because God becomes the computer programmer. But that's just God of this universe. It also means that there may be millions of gods over millions of universes. And further, that there may still be a singular, omnipotent, monotheistic God over them. Just like the Klingons were an allegory of communist Russia. Well, they were less. That's the funny thing. Again, we forget that the Klingons were there as a foreign superpower, much like Russia was to the United States at the time. But if you look at the behavior of the Klingons in the original series, now granted, they really weren't fleshed out much until much later. Well, not until the Next Gen era. But if we do look at what little we have, the closest we come to an allegory for Russia is the fact that Kor, when he took over Organia, would talk about how everybody was constantly under surveillance, that they were all part of a singular unit. And, of course, what is the number one word we always think of when we think of the Soviets was, comrade, and that that they were all working together for Mother Russia and that kind of thing. There are some vague similarities there, But outside of that, there wasn't really much there, other than the Klingons were the bad guys. We also see indications that the Klingons were not on par with the Federation, at least in some ways. So if we look at episodes like Day of the Dove, Mara, Kang's wife and science officer, explains that the Klingons are impoverished people, and so they expand and raid in order to get the necessary things that they need for survival, as opposed to the Federation, which lives in the land of milk and honey. So there are definite differences as well as some similarities. Did that Mormonism carry over to the new BSG? Wasn't Starbuck an angel? Well, in the end of the newer one, there is some weird theological stuff going on, but I don't know that it, I wouldn't call it a direct allegory to Mormonism like in the classic BSG. It was more just a general spirituality. And there's Alex saying, Demiurge is the creator god that Gnostics believed was evil. He was the Old Testament God, while God, the good God, was the New Testament God. Okay. I did not know that, but I will take your word for it. True, but only to a certain point, because Gnosticism was a lot like Wicca. There are no totally fundamental beliefs, vast a very specific point. Well, yeah, the Gnostics were a weird group. But the Gnostic, you could think of it in some ways like atheists today, because there's no core set of atheist principles that all atheists believe. The only thing that atheists have in common is that they do not believe in a god or gods. Let's see. Yep, because they lost out on a struggle against the proto-Orthodox because they weren't as organized and kept modifying their canon. I don't think that. Well, I'm not going to get into your whole thing that you think that the Orthodox Church is the one true church and all that garbage. I'm just not into that fight right now. I will only say that any church that says that they're the one true church isn't. All right, so anything else? I can't believe I'm all caught up. Granted, I got a late start, so got a small crowd today. But if we got more, I'm rearing to go. I would like to, it's funny because I've talked to a few atheists on random intervals, and whenever I do, I always say, hey, you know what? Come to my live stream on Sunday, challenge me. And most of them never do. The atheists that do wander into these streams are usually of the trolling type, where they want to say some inflammatory comment about religion and then run away hiding. Like say, oh, well, religion has caused people to suffer and therefore religion is bad. And it's like, okay, but that's still not an argument against the existence of God, nor is it an argument for atheism. No versus questions yet. What about Babylon 5 versus Battlestar Galactica? Never watched the latter, but watched all the former. Well, that's funny because I've watched all of the latter, but it's been so long since I've watched Babylon. I don't think I've watched Babylon 5 all the way through since its original airing. It seems like the tech level in B5 is, well, depending on which version of Battlestar Galactica you're talking about, because TOS Battlestar Galactica, the tech seems to be on par with Babylon 5, where they're using energy weapons primarily. And the ships do not have faster than light travel, but the Battlestars themselves can actually attain light speed. At least according to Commander Kane. So, whereas the newer Battlestar Galactica, it's interesting because the newer Battlestar Galactica has far more advanced transportation systems, but it seems far less advanced weaponry. So it would be interesting to see what happened in combat there. Well, the Gnostics were the very first to try to write a Bible. Their leader, a as an American, published Luke and Paul's letters without the Old Testament. Okay. I don't know that any of that is true, and I'm not arguing about that. Street Preacher, Stan Lee, in the house. Good morning. In Babylon 5, is Babylon 5 different enough from Deep Space Nine for me to give it a go? I never seem to make it through the first season. Is it different enough from Deep Space Nine to give it a go? Sure. If you can take the rather poor set design, bad acting, and laughably bad visual effects. If you can get all past all that, then sure. And also saying hi to Stan. Stan says, sorry, afternoon, because you said morning. Well, it's morning somewhere, right? It's afternoon for me, sure, but it's morning for half the world at all times. Isn't that weird the way that works? Right, anything else, or is this going to be like the shortest stream ever? Well, we've been going for almost an hour, but it's not. Still hoping to get an atheist on here, but so far no luck. Let's see. Found out several days ago the X-Files getting a reboot, though no Mulder and Scully, going to be about two completely different agents. Maybe. Could be good, could be bad. Oh, and we got another question from Marin. Could the existence of some sort of supernatural phenomenon not tied to deities be evidence against theism? The existence of some sort of supernatural phenomenon not tied to a deity. So, for example, let's say a near-death experience, but no, at least evidentially, no God or angels or anything like that. Just floating out of body, or ESP or something like that. I would argue no. The only thing that a supernatural phenomenon not tied to a deity is evidence of is that there is supernatural phenomena. It's not an argument that God does or does not exist, only that this supernatural thing can happen, or this supernatural thing exists. And that unless that supernatural thing is a big four-dimensional neon sign saying there are no gods, then it's not evidence for or against the existence of God. At least I don't see it that way. Because for it to be evidence of something, it means that it has to have some kind of empirical link to that thing. Did Salty do a Spidey review? Not yet. It's something I would have liked to have done, but just haven't had the time. I did enjoy the film. I thought it was good. I think that it did what it had to do as far as Spider-Man is concerned. I think that Jean Grey is an interesting addition to the Marvel Universe. And I also think the way they introduced her, like, I know some people have been weighing back and forth about the Jean Grey character because, she does terrible things in this story. And I think of it as, well, Jean Grey is a teenager whose sister was abducted by the government, experimented on, and Jean herself has to basically live off the grid in order to try to, my goodness, this thing is just going to keep going off. Let me turn down the alerts on here. So I get why some people found the way they dealt with Jean Grey to be controversial. I didn't. I thought that it actually felt kind of real, in that if you had a kid with the kind of power that Jean Grey has, going through the kind of circumstance that Jean Grey was going through, I find that totally realistic, and that she desperately needs a Professor X to come in, teach her to control her powers, and more importantly, teach her to use them in an ethical way. The thing is, smart atheists know not to waste their time debating theology since it's kind of irrelevant. I would beg to differ with that statement. I would say that because there are plenty of atheists that are far smarter than you or I that engage in such debate. I mean, I think Richard Dawkins. Richard Dawkins, I think, is dead wrong, but I'm certainly never going to call him dumb. Christopher Hitchens, incredibly intelligent guy. Heck, you look at Matt Dillahunty, very intelligent guy. Steve Shives, reasonably intelligent guy. Bill Maher, intelligent guy. And all of these guys have had massive amounts of debates with Christians and believers of other faiths about the existence of God. However, in almost every case, they show their absurd amount of ignorance in having these debates if they're going against somebody who actually poses a good argument. Alex O'Connor, man, he is probably one of the smartest guys on YouTube, and he talks about it all the time. And I don't think it's irrelevant at all. It's only, I mean, you would think it would be if you're an atheist, but many atheists don't find it irrelevant because they have this persecution complex where they believe that Christians are all running around trying to force them to believe in their version of Jesus. And, I will tell you that I've talked to a lot of atheists in my day, and not once have I tried to force anyone to agree with me. In fact, I don't even know how you would force someone to agree with you. Let's see. Then Stan says, guess most people would be motivated to prove something than to disprove something they don't believe in anyway. Well, but here's the thing, and this is why I think it is important. If you genuinely believe, let me give a word of encouragement to my atheist friends. If you genuinely believe not only that there is no God or gods, but also, as most atheists tend to believe, that religion is the cause of the majority of human suffering, then by all means you should be out there arguing your case. Because the best way to reduce human suffering would be to make everybody an atheist based on those claims. On the flip side, to my Christian friends or any other strong believers in any given religion, if you genuinely believe that only practitioners of your faith or people who are at the very least compliant with certain tenets of your faith, if you believe that they are the only ones that are going to be saved in the next life and everybody else will be condemned, regardless of what form you think that condemnation would take, then you should be trying to convince everybody that you meet of the truth and validity of your beliefs. After all, you want them, isn't the whole goal to get everybody into heaven, right? So I think it's the most important thing to debate. Legos is coming out with an X-Files Lego set. Not at Walmart yet. I checked. They're also doing a TOS bridge set, which I would love to get, but we'll never have the money for. Well, Salty wants to treat the debate as a civil case, but it's more like a criminal case where the theist is like the prosecution and has to prove God beyond a reasonable doubt. Why? I mean, honestly, outside of that being an atheist argument that they don't have a burden of proof, which is silly, because it's not about burden of proof. It's about what's right and wrong. And honestly, it's about the preponderance of evidence. That's why I treat it more like a civil case if you were going to go with the courtroom analogy. Because if you are a scientist, assuming that you actually believe in the core principles of science, then you should want to follow the evidence wherever that evidence might lead. And if that evidence points to the existence of a God, then you should accept that a God most likely exists. If you think that that evidence points away from the existence of a God, then the opposite. Instead, what we usually get is vague notions of there's no evidence, blah, blah, blah. All you have is the Bible, blah, blah, blah. As if the Bible, first of all, as if that's not evidence. And as if that is the only evidence of Christianity's truthfulness, is the fact that the Bible exists. I think that there's way more history there than you are talking about, and that's a core problem in the discussion. Is that many atheists refuse to even acknowledge the existence of evidence. And Stan says, sorry, I had a pipe leaking under the sink this morning, been dealing with other drips. That's all good. There was a lot of supernatural things in the original X-Files also. Yes, there were. I didn't get into the X-Files that much because at the time that the X-Files aired, and it aired Sunday nights, I had a job where I worked swing shift, and I worked Sunday nights, and I worked from 3 p.m. to midnight. And keep in mind, this is not the modern age of streaming we're talking about. This is where if you're not watching it Sunday night and you didn't record it with a VCR, you weren't watching it. Best of the Holland Spideys, question mark. Best is a hard one to give. I can't quite go there. I really like No Way Home. No Way Home has its flaws, but I just love the 3 Spider-Men. This one definitely has some really strong aspects. It does some very serious world building for Marvel for the future. I think we see the origin of the mutant restraint collars. We see the origin of, I can't remember what they're called, but the government department of mutants or whatever, mutant control. That mutant control is going to be an offshoot of damage control, stuff like that. And the idea that Spider-Man is a little bit of an outlaw is kind of beginning in this movie, even though he's working with the law at the beginning of this film. So I think that there's a lot of really good world building, but it didn't have its 3 Peters moment for me. Solid movie all the way through. Enjoyed it from beginning to end. But it didn't quite clinch anything as cool to me as having the 3 different Peters interacting and just talking about their adventures. And Stan says, her killing people is a bit odd. Well, here's the thing. It's a bit odd to you because you're thinking of Jean Grey. But by the way, I really hate she's the only X-Man that doesn't go by her name, Marvel Girl. But you're used to Jean Grey being the mature leader of the X-Men, right? That she is the consort of Cyclops and the two of them are like the two of the founding members of the team. And she is the consummate superhero. People forget about the fact that Jean, like all of them, started out as a person who was running from humanity. Who and mutants were being hunted down, and Professor X got the idea of creating a safe haven for mutants, and that's what the School for Gifted Youngsters was all about. And so we're seeing a pre-X-Men Jean Grey here, not a post-Phoenix Jean Grey. But I guess many of the X-Men were evil before Professor X turned them around. Well, they were criminal for sure. And you're absolutely right that killing that dude was really messed up. And trying to kill MJ and the stuff she does is pretty messed up. But then think about it. Again, she's a teenager with this kind of power. And she's desperate. When you were a teenager, were you really, that morally centered that if you were push came to shove, you wouldn't kill somebody if you were desperately trying to save your family? So, and let's not forget that Jean Grey has also killed more people than any other X-Men in history. She killed an entire civilization in the Dark Phoenix saga. And yet, and by the way, she was not irrational. She was not mind controlled. She killed an entire civilization. Jean Grey did. And yet, all was forgiven a few years later. She is a killer, and that's part of her character. Well, that was part of her character in the comics as well. Let's see. If we were in the universe where Gnostics won the battle for the canon of Christianity, would Salty still be defending Christianity? Well, you're assuming that the Gnostics were truly Christian. I don't think that they were. With my limited understanding of the Gnostics, I don't think that they were actually Christian, so I don't think they could have won that battle, if you will. Nor do I care. Multiple religions are the cause of many deaths. The Enterprise did an episode about it. The people who believed the spheres were divine creations. Well, the funny thing is, like Christopher Hitchens was famous for making the argument that people will do absolutely horrendous things in the name of religion. And talked about many of the horrific things, like whether you're talking about the Inquisition or the Salem witch trials or whatever. None of which am I defending, by the way. However, Hitchens never talks about the fact that political ideology and resources are responsible for far more deaths than any religion. Human nature is tribalism. And so wars are going to happen regardless of what people happen to believe as far as God or no God, which I think South Park did a brilliant commentary on, where when they eliminated God from the picture and everybody was an atheist, then people started having wars over why each other's version of science was wrong. But yeah, the simple fact is that people, unfortunately, are willing to kill for just about anything, radicalize them enough. Let's see. Funny you should talk about that, because it's possible, it could be possible because of God's mercy that he wouldn't allow the Gnostics to have won the battle for canon. I don't think the Gnostics could have won. I don't believe the Earth is flat. I also don't spend any time trying to argue that I'm right. But here's the interesting thing about trying to make that as an analogy for atheists arguing about the existence of God. The reason you don't believe that the Earth is flat is because the evidence is overwhelmingly obvious that the Earth is a roughly spherical shape. However, when it comes to God, there is the reason I think the atheists get their panties in a wad so much about the existence of God is because the sad truth is that the evidence is on the theist side. And so the atheists, they kind of do a Donald Trump here, where the atheists, they keep telling you there's no evidence in order to try to convince you that there's no evidence, when in fact, all the evidence is on the theist side. So they have to keep pushing it in order to keep atheism alive. Alex says, some atheists understand that Christians can't, assuming that's supposed to be, live without their faith, and without it could become dangerous nihilists and find some dangerous ideology. Okay. Not sure what your point there is. Let's see. Modern Lego Dawn. Again, no idea what you're talking about. Made sense to me. I thought a rather impressive thing about Lego is that they could build very intricate models using only rectangular blocks. Except that they don't, at least not anymore. They haven't in some time. When I was young, and I was a child, but when I was young, Legos were, in fact, just colored blocks, right? There were a few specialty blocks, but most of them were just colored blocks, that were either between 1 and like 5 pips wide, and between 1 and something like 20 pips long. They came in a flat sheet that was about 1 millimeter, or maybe, I don't know. No, it's more than a millimeter. I don't know. I'd have to try to do the math, but, however many millimeters. And then you could stack 3 of those together and be the standard height, or is it 4? Something like that. But you would stack a certain number of them together and you'd have the standard height of a regular Lego. And then you had half height Legos and smooth top Legos and stuff like that. But now, when you buy a Lego, and by the way, you'd buy a kit, like the original Starship kit. And it was just a bunch of blocks, and it would give you the instructions on how to make the Starship. But you could make a million other things with it, and even the directions for the Starship showed you variants that you could make with this kit, which was pretty cool. However, the modern Legos are so specialized that really it's just a model kit with funny pips on them. It's a snap-together model that just happens to be bumpy. And I think that's too bad, because Legos aren't really a universal block anymore as much as just pieces of a larger model kit. Hindsight always seems like it was preordained by God. Not sure what you mean there. All these new Lego model kits are sold with loads of unique custom pieces. Yeah, exactly. Designed to only build specific licensed model. Yes, I have a big problem with that. Not everything was ordained by God. Sin is a real thing that God takes into account. The problem with thwarting God's will is that it always makes you a host to your own petard. Interesting. But yes, I don't think that everything is in accordance with God's will. And Daniel puts in the theological questions Thank you for the question, Daniel. It says, hey, Salty, what does religion say about luck, bad luck? Is it something that is already set? And what is luck, bad luck anyway? Okay, luck slash bad luck is simply humans trying to make a pattern out of good fortune or bad fortune. I mean, look, think of the Doomsday Machine. After the Doomsday Machine attacks the Enterprise and they assess the damage, Spock says random chance seems to have operated in our favor. To which Dr. McCoy says, in plain non-Vulcan English, we've been lucky. And then Spock retorts, I believe I just said that, Doctor. So there is, in my opinion, no true such thing as luck or bad luck, right? You are not just lucky, and you might be. That doesn't mean that nobody puts their finger on the scales every now and then, but I don't think that there is such a thing as luck or bad luck. Those are just terms that we use to try to show a pattern of someone having good fortune or bad fortune. But I do believe there's such a thing as being cursed or blessed. That I do believe that someone, perhaps as a result of their sin, perhaps as a result of sin that has occurred in their family or whatever, has extra struggles that other people don't have. Or may have difficulty succeeding because demonic forces are purposely holding them back. But that's not luck. That's just, there's behind the scenes stuff going on that sometimes we have no clue is happening. So, but here's the danger. What we have a tendency to do is like, I'll tell you. So today, I've been having trouble because I'm trying to lose weight. And if you've ever gone through any kind of weight changes, among other things, your fingers get fatter and thinner as time, does things. So I started getting so fat that I couldn't wear my wedding ring anymore. So my wife got me a fat finger wedding ring, right, which I started wearing. But now I'm losing a little bit of weight, and guess what? My fingers are a little smaller. So what happened? My wedding ring fell off, so I don't have it on right now. Drives me nuts. In fact, I called my wife just before I did this show to tell her, I can't find my ring. It might be in the bed, like if it slipped off when I was sleeping. It might be in a sink if I was washing my hands or washing something and it fell off. I don't know. There's a million places it could be. I looked around a little bit before the show, but I didn't want to spend my whole day looking for the ring. Now, some people say, "Oh, you see, that's God telling me that my marriage has disappeared," or I don't know, or maybe that it's time that I get a divorce or something. People will do that where they're reading into the tea leaves stuff because they attribute things to being definitively supernatural that may just be, I lost a few pounds and the ring slipped off. Right? Sometimes people stub their toe because they're clumsy, and sometimes they might stub their toe because a demon puts a rock in front of their foot. You don't know which it is when you stub your toe. And so we have to be careful not to attribute everything to the supernatural, because we don't know what is and isn't supernatural. But we also need to be careful not to always rule out the supernatural, because we don't know whether it's supernatural. And instead, we should live with an open mind, knowing that in the end, God is in control. Robert says, hi to Stan. A few days ago here on YouTube, I saw a commercial for the X-Files Lego set. Had Gillian Anderson doing the commercial. That's cool. And Stan says, so if the Lego pieces are all unique to each kit, then how's it any different than traditional model kits like Airfix, etc.? The difference is they have pips on the top. She still looks great at her age. I've not seen the commercial, so no comment. Weeknights on Comet TV, they show X-Files. That's cool. And Stan says, damage control, all in caps. Will Hollywood ever make a movie? Will Hollywood ever move on from comic books? You know, here's the funny thing. I don't know what you're talking about. The majority of movies that I've seen this year have had nothing to do with comic books. Marvel has 2 movies this year. DC, I think, has 2, if I remember correctly. I think it's Supergirl and Clayface, but I could be wrong. Supergirl was terrible. Hopefully, Clayface will be better. As for Marvel, Spider-Man was solid. I'm hoping that Doomsday is awesome. And I think isn't next year the only Marvel movie is Secret Wars? Now, they're doing stuff on Disney Plus, sure, but, you know, I don't see what you're talking about. Sure, Marvel Studios is going to always make Marvel movies. But guess what? The rest of Disney's properties aren't. So I have no idea what you mean. It's cool these movies have reached a point where Spider-Man can just go anywhere, interacting with everyone, wearing his costume, and doesn't seem weird. I liked the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man sequences of the movie. I thought that was one of the movie's strongest points. I think having Spider-Man just sitting across a desk from someone having a meeting in an office would have been really strange in the first Raimi movie. Yes, I agree. Let's see. When I was a teenager, I listened to albums called Kill 'Em All. And Daniel says Metallica. I assume, did Metallica do an album called Kill 'Em All? I don't know. I have heard some pretty terrible music when I was young, though. I do remember that. In 160 AD, a Valentinian, a Gnostic, almost won the election for Bishop of Rome. So yes, they could. I don't care. I really don't care, Alex. So you're a Roman Catholic now. Does like real life, the Punisher would have been in prison if not on death row. Oh yeah, Punisher, definitely a death row contender. If there was, assuming they had capital punishment in the state, I don't know if they do in New York, but yeah, for what he did, absolutely. I think the comic book superhero fad is a response to just how little freedom ordinary people have to stand up for themselves. Basically, a sublimate the liberty that people have lost into Spider-Man. What are you talking about? I meant that if atheists convince Christians to abandon their faith, they will start committing the sins there as they no longer fear God. Also, a lot of Americans have embraced socialism without God. Yeah, well, a lot of Americans are also Christian nationalists, which is antithetical to Christianity. I mean, I don't see your point. And I don't believe that if somehow atheists proved God didn't exist, number one, people like the MAGA types, they would still believe it even if there was absolute proof that it was false. Number two, I don't think that every Christian would suddenly become a serial killer just because they were no longer a Christian. If that were the case, then every person who deconverted from Christianity to atheism should be a serial killer right now. But as far as I know, Matt Dillahunty is not a serial killer. Steve Shives may be a complete a-hole, but he is definitely not a serial killer. And by the way, those of you that pray, please do keep Steve Shives in your prayers. I've been talking to him a little bit on the side lately. His dad passed away recently, and a mutual friend of ours. I haven't watched a Steve Shives video in a long time, not since he told conservatives to just go away and not watch his channel. So I, as a friend, respected his wishes, and he and I have been friends. But I reached out to him when I heard about it, and he and I chatted quite a bit this last week. But you know, it's tough to go through a loss like that. He was close with his father. He lost his father. So keep Steve in your prayers. Stan says, "Ha, that's exactly what I was saying about Lego. I need to include an entire statement in the same comment. Ha ha ha. I haven't played with Legos since I was a teenager. I haven't played with Legos in a long time either. Now I do 3D printing stuff. Which, by the way, check this out. So I was experimenting a little bit with some paint and did a couple of 3D prints. There we go. Little Borg action there. I think the green undertones came out pretty good. But yeah. Which, by the way, this sphere is to scale with those other starships that I did. Let's see. Foul Win 9719. New to the channel, I presume. Nice to see you. Hope that you will stick around if we're going to have a conversation about this. So, the concept of sin or curses is just magic thinking and not based in reality. Actually, that's an oversimplification, and that's the problem, is that if you simply want to hand wave things away and say you just believe in magic, rather than to listen to what the person actually believes, then you're never going to properly understand your opponent. And you're just going to look foolish. Demonic forces, it's 2026. Please say you are not serious. Again, demonic does not mean magical. It does mean supernatural, but supernatural doesn't mean magic in the way that you are using the term. And that's the problem, is that I get that you may be strongly opposed to the Christian perspective. That's fine. Then please give me your argument to why theism is false or that atheism is true. I would genuinely love to hear it. So what is your argument that theism is false and or atheism is true? Let's see. The idea of sin, demons, etc. is just a way for people to feel important in the face of reality by creating excuses for things out of their control. See, again, and this is funny, because this shows the ignorance of the poster of this. And I'm not saying that to be a jerk, but many cases, this is a common belief that many atheists put out there. That you're just trying to explain away like lightning or, you know, I don't know, a flood or whatever. No, I don't believe in Thor. I don't believe in, you know, God's, blowing the wind at me or making me lose my car keys or any of that. So I don't, I think that you have a fundamentally flawed idea of what we believe. How's believing right, wrong, magic thinking, curses maybe, but sin is definitely something people do. Lee says, been losing weight too and can't keep my wedding ring on either. Yeah, so you know exactly what I'm talking about. Just check the Lego website. When it's released, X-Files Lego set without tax, $199. A little too expensive, yeah. Legos are way too expensive nowadays. X-Files on Pluto. Let's see. That's a rumor going to go directly from Doomsday to... I don't think that's a rumor. I think that's just what's on the schedule. We know that Doomsday is leading into Secret Wars. What we don't know is that is Marvel... I don't believe Marvel is releasing anything in between the two. So I think those are going to... Marvel has definitely scaled back their production in order to focus on quality over quantity, and I think they've done a good job of it. And it looks like, unfortunately, our friend has just been one of those atheists that likes to post a quick comment and run away because they don't actually have what it takes to have the discussion. Or maybe I'll be proven wrong. I hope I am. But so far, at least, it doesn't appear that way. Stan says, yes, as a teenager, I might not have been completely crushed by the school bully got hit by a bus. Maybe the Freddy versus Jason turned Freddy into a good guy. Well, okay, that's weird. I agree. Superhero fantasy is fantasy having more power to control your own life. But I don't think that it's necessarily because we Americans lack freedom or something. Like Alex seems to think that we're living in this incredibly oppressed society. We're not oppressed. We're just drowning in our own stupidity. Roman Catholics and the Orthodox were the one church, Catholic Orthodox. It was not until in '54, the Great Schism. That's really funny. There were, never. This is the first time I've ever heard the term Catholic Orthodox. Like that was the name of the church prior to the schism. Look, I know that the Catholic Church, the Orthodox Church broke off of the Catholic Church, and during the Great Schism, I understand that. What I dispute is that either of you were the one true church. Let's see. And then says, I am. I'm not sure what you mean. I'm glad you understand what I mean. Let's see. Yeah, it was funny in Spidey having Ned and Peter bonding young while building Lego, except now they're both college grads who are pushing 30. Yeah. Building an X-Wing fighter. Yeah, it's a dream of not being afraid of anything, having the strength to stand up for yourself in any situation. Well, I see the fantasy aspect of that in superheroes, but I don't think it's because of a lack of freedom. I think it might be a lack of strength or a lack of power that many of us feel in our lives. Like when I think about the MS and stuff, yeah, would I love to have superpowers instead of MS? Sure I would. But and do I watch superhero movies because of that? Maybe to some extent. I think more I watch them for nostalgia because I have all my comic books from the 60s and 70s and 80s right over there. I don't need to worry about getting your ass kicked. But many superheroes do get their asses kicked despite the fact that they have superpowers. Well, lightning is Zeus. True. The only bag of wind around here is salty. That is also true. Exactly, and Spider-Man doesn't have to worry about due process, unlike cops or the U.S. government. Well, that's actually, and I wish they would have touched on that a little bit in this movie, because Spider-Man is clearly working, at least to some extent, with the New York police. And you'll notice, like, I don't know if you caught this, but at one point, Spider-Man, he webs up the bad guys. They're hanging from a street lamp or something. And when he goes to that one cop that's his friend, he says, you'll find all the evidence you need, and he tells her where. So it's like he is working with her in an indirect sense. But Spidey may not have to worry about due process, but the cops still do. And that's where, so Spidey has to be careful about how he, gets said evidence. Is that a turn of phrase? Now you're getting into better shape and looking good. The wedding ring doesn't stay on all the time anymore. No. Speaking of Doomsday, if Doomsday was put in the Marvel Universe... speaking of Doomsday, if Doomsday was put in the Marvel Universe, would there be anyone that could permanently stop him? Well, Doom is going to be in the Marvel Universe. Doomsday is a Marvel Universe movie. I'm not sure how your question doesn't quite flow. But as far as, is there anyone that could permanently stop Doom? It's going to depend on how they write Doom. I don't know how, yes, we all saw the shot where Doom holds up two fingers and blocks Stormbreaker, which is a very impressive feat for sure, considering Stormbreaker overpowered the full Infinity Gauntlet. However, we don't know how powerful Doom really is, and we won't know until December. Well, Falwyn is like Stan said. He sees Christians as we do flat earthers and doesn't see the point. No, he's a troll and showed up to troll. But at least his lack of responses since that shows me that. I don't think that he's, and he may see Christianity in much the same way that we see flat Earth, but the problem is it's not because there's no evidence or that there's overwhelming evidence that Christianity is false. It's that he refuses to actually pay attention to our beliefs, or at least mine. I don't know what you believe, Alex, because sometimes I think you're a straight up atheist, and other times I think that you are a nutcase fundamentalist. So I don't know where you lie. Right now you're sounding more like an atheist, but I don't know. If you were to come across civilization perfect in every way other than zero belief in the divine creator, do you tell them about God or do you keep that information to yourself? A civilization perfect in every way, except that they don't believe in a divine creator. So you're telling me that it is a society that obeys, there's, no pain, no strife. Everybody is fed. Everybody's taken care of. There's no infidelity. There's no betrayal. There's no evil of any kind whatsoever. And yet they lack a belief in God. I would think that I was experiencing some kind of delusion because I don't think such a society is possible. No, the Catholics broke off from the Orthodox by issuing the people excommunication. Sure, whatever, dude. You know what? You take up your fight with the Catholics. I don't care. I don't think either of you have exclusive rights to Jesus. As long as the cops walk in the streets with the ability to conduct violence, we are not free. Oh, okay. Right. So, I get it now. You're an anarchist today. Whatever. Look, I know you said this kind of thing before, but here's the problem. I don't know. Alex, I wish you would give a straight answer, but you never do. Are you just an atheist that happens to like to troll and say that you are an Orthodox Christian? Because I think you are. Very similar to how Batman was shown working directly with the cops in The Batman. Yes. Citizens arrests are a real thing, though, so Spidey just makes a lot of citizens arrests. No, because if Spider-Man was to be making citizens arrests as opposed to simply handing these guys over to the local cops with the evidence, then Spider-Man would have to show up in court. Yeah, Batman was my favorite. Batman was never my favorite. Guess he's not a vigilante if cops are allowing their activity. Actually, no, he's still a vigilante. It's just that the cops are allowing it because, he's helping them. Oh, the DC Universe Doomsday. Oh, that's what you were talking about. The DC Universe. So if you're talking about the DC EU Doomsday, which is easier to compare, if he were to go up against, if he were to just suddenly pop into the MCU and start wreaking havoc, yes, I think that there are a couple of Marvel heroes that could put him down, most notably Thor and also Hulk. I'd say Captain Marvel, Scarlet Witch, Doctor Strange. They could all put him down permanently. Does anyone here bother debating flat earthers? I would love to debate a flat earther if one had the courage to come on and debate. The problem is most of them, like Darren, will come on, make a couple of comments and run away, just like we saw from what's-his-name earlier. I can always play an atheist, not hard. This is why I follow. Don't know what you mean. This is why I follow the mystery of faith doctrine. Can't logically explain faith, so just believe. Yeah, you see, there's a problem with that, and that's so you just believe whatever the church tells you to believe. That's something we call blind faith, and I don't agree with that. Orthodox don't bother arguing and getting along and get along better with non-believers. Well, but here's the problem. If you're not going to look, I don't have a problem with not being a quarrelsome type person. I don't think you should argue just to argue all the time, as much as I love arguing. But do you, let me ask you, do you actually uplift or encourage or support or affirm things that are anti-biblical? And if you do, why do you call yourself a Christian? Because it seems like you do. Being an anarchist and being Orthodox do not contradict. Yes, I was baptized Orthodox and go to an Orthodox church. Well, being baptized and going to a church don't make you a Christian. It just means you were baptized and you attend church. What makes you a Christian is what's in your heart, not what somebody did to you. And Ariel Ballet in the theistic question section says, question 4 against theism is a partial truth. Is it a partial truth that any type of faith could be considered just a large cult, that there is to gain money, power, and brainwash those that are following a certain faith? So, could you make the argument that any and all religions, are just cults trying to get your money and control your life? Whether you're talking about the Orthodox Church, the Catholic Church, the various Protestant churches, and all that, and not to mention the non-Christian faiths. That's still, despite the fact that that's a good argument, it's not an argument against theism, and it's not even truly an argument against Christianity. It's an argument against the church itself, the validity of the church itself. And I would say this, that there is, of course, plenty of evidence that a lot of churches, including the Catholic Church, the Orthodox Church, and many, if not all, of the Protestant denominations, exist with the specific purpose of trying to make more money and control their followers. But that does not mean they're wrong. It only questions their motives. And even then, let's say you could demonstrably prove that every existing Christian church and every existing sect of Judaism, Islam, Hinduism, and every other religion were just mechanisms to try to make money, like Scientology. If you could demonstrably prove all that, does that therefore mean God does not exist? Or does it simply mean that these various churches or other religious organizations are evil? See what I'm saying? So it's not an argument against theism. It's just an argument against religious practices. And it's certainly not an argument for atheism, because it doesn't suggest that there's no God. Though a few years ago, Death Battle did Hulk versus Doomsday, they even used the most powerful version of the Hulk, and he still got killed by Doomsday. That's because Death Battle has a bias against Marvel. Look, Danko does that kind of stuff too, and he has a bias Most of these channels that do versus videos, unfortunately, what they'll do is they'll say, well, I'm going to use the strongest version of Hulk, but then they'll leave out the things that Hulk did that would actually show that he could, in fact, defeat Doomsday. And they'll use, the strongest version of Doomsday, of course, as well, in order to, in order to make sure that their side can win. When I said, that's why I specified we're talking about movie version of Doomsday, not the comic book version of Doomsday. Now, the original comic book version of Doomsday, the one that actually killed Superman, if that one went into the MCU, the film version of the MCU, I would still, I don't know if Thor or Captain Marvel could beat him, but I would still say the Hulk can, because the Hulk can do one thing that no other character can do, and the Hulk has no upper strength limit. And Doomsday is super strong for sure, but he's not going to one-shot the Hulk. He couldn't one-shot Superman, so he's not going to one-shot Hulk. And so, and the problem with fighting the Hulk is that the more you hit the Hulk, the more powerful the Hulk gets. And then Ariel says, not a question, but sent you a little something to your coffee tip jar. Well, thank you so much, Ariel. I truly, truly appreciate it, because every dime definitely helps. Anti-biblical, you mean not agreeing with Darren Wagner about the young earth? When I said anti-biblical, did I say anything about Darren Wagner and the flat earth thing? I don't know if I did. If I did, I was unintentional. Or are you saying that I'm anti-biblical because I don't agree with Darren about the young earth? Oh, the young earth, not the flat earth. Well, here's the funny thing about that. Young earth creationism is not in the Bible. That's something that and didn't exist really until, was it the 19th century? And so we went through 1900 years without young earth creationism. Now, of course, young earth creationists try to say that if you don't believe in young earth creationism, you don't believe in the Bible. Ariel says, gotcha. And I assume it's from your question. And then, and hello, everyone. Hope you've all been doing well good this Sunday. Well, it's always better now that you're in the house. Oh, and the whole sola scriptura is a Protestant concept. Yeah, the funny thing about sola scriptura, do I adhere, if you will, to sola scriptura? No. I don't think that sola scriptura is biblical. However, I do think that there is a definite hierarchy of authority, and I do not believe that the modern church is particularly high on that list. As far as if I am trying to determine whether something is godly or in alliance with God, yes, the Bible comes first, because the Bible is the written word of God. And if you don't believe that, then clearly you're not a Christian. But you can still be a good person. I'm not saying you're a bad person if you don't believe the Bible is true or whatever. But if you don't put the Bible at the top of the authority list, then you might as well chuck out the whole deal. Now, the Bible is the highest authority that we have, because it's a collection of works from people who were in direct communication with God. And that is a level that no other person can achieve. After that, Now, we can look at corroborating evidence in church history. It's kind of like some of the stuff that you talk about at times, but where you can say, okay, so was the canon of Scripture really not set until whatever year they, when the various things were, like the Council of Nicaea or whatever? Or can you see that the canon of Scripture was known but maybe not published prior to that? Well, you can if you look at church history. If you look at the early church writings, it becomes painfully obvious to what books they're referring to, and more specifically, what books they are not referring to in their writings when they're calling them Scripture. And by the way, as much as the church fathers are revered by the Catholic and Orthodox churches, and even some Protestant churches, you know what? Nobody ever says that that's Scripture. They just say they're early church writings. Nobody says that Thomas Aquinas' writings are scriptural in as far as terms of level of authority. If Thomas Aquinas said something that contradicts what it says in 1 Corinthians, well, you go with what it says in 1 Corinthians. I mean, that's just kind of how it goes. But I wouldn't even put that as second. I would put second as natural observation. So, for example, how do we know the shape of the earth? Is it because the Bible has some kind of reference to the four corners of the earth, and therefore it's saying the earth is flat? Well, no, that's just a colloquialism that people have used as long as there's been language, right? That's really not evidence for or against the shape of the earth. We know the shape of the earth because we can observe it, right? And we can do experiments and use our rational minds that God gave us to determine the shape of the earth. Now, I do like, and this is another one where you try to take corroborating things. I can't remember, I think it was Aquinas that wrote that if we observe something to be true, but it doesn't line up with our view or doctrine on Scripture, then we need to reassess our view on Scripture. And I think that is a very powerful, poignant statement that we need to take very seriously. Because one thing that this is what the young earthers do, and this is what the flat earthers do, and this is what a lot of people do, is they say, well, I have this particular belief that comes from either my church or just what I thought when I read this particular passage in the Bible. However, I see with my own eyes that that is not true. Therefore, I'm going to come up with a reason why what I'm seeing is not true. And that's where you come up with all these various conspiracy theories from the flat earthers and stuff like that. And so, yeah. That's just my 2 cents on it. But as far as sola scriptura, no, sola scriptura, Scripture alone, I think I would say prima scriptura, right? Scripture is the first level of authority. But, observational evidence, yes, church history can come into play, but I do not think that if the Pope offers an edict from on high, that makes it true. Well, what is anti-biblical? There's a reason why these debates are so fierce in early Christianity and the Reformation happened. People can interpret things in different ways. It is possible to interpret some things in different ways. And like, for example, young earth, old earth, I can say that, okay, even though I think it's crazy, I can understand why some people think that the Bible suggests that the earth was created in 6 days, 6,000 years ago. I can kind of see that. But and so I don't necessarily say that a person who believes in a younger earth than I do is necessarily anti-biblical. However, if you have a doctrine that goes directly against something that's in Scripture, for example, you have the certain groups of Baptists will tell you that drinking alcohol is forbidden. It's not forbidden at all in the Bible. And in fact, Jesus himself drank wine on multiple occasions in the Bible. So I think that if you are teaching people that drinking is forbidden, that is anti-biblical, because you are teaching somebody something that the Bible plainly states is untrue. If you were to, for example, you have these progressive churches nowadays that try to say that God affirms the LGBTQIA plus community and stuff. And I'm going to say, even though it's not a popular opinion these days, that's anti-biblical. You may not be, like I said, socially popular by suggesting as much, but the Bible makes it very clear that sexual morality is a real thing, and that God absolutely does care that you keep yourself sexually pure, at least as sexually pure as possible. That doesn't mean we all succeed at it, and it doesn't mean that those sins can't be forgiven. But if you're going to teach that the Bible says something that it doesn't, or that or teach that it's okay to do something that the Bible strictly forbids, that's anti-biblical. All right, so back to the question tab. Thank you, Ariel. Says, do atheists just not believe in Scientology as much as the theism, even though Scientology has become a religion in and of itself, or would it still be considered two different things? Well, I wouldn't say there is a singular atheist position on any question, because atheists are just as varied as any other group of people. But the question would really be, is Scientology a theistic religion? If Scientology itself is non-theistic, and I'm not a Scientologist, so I don't really know where they go with all their stuff. I know that there's the South Park episodes making fun of them for believing in, aliens throwing thetans into volcanoes and all that. But I don't know if that's part of Scientology belief or not. Don't really care. I'm not a Scientologist. But I would say this: if an atheist found no issue with Scientology because Scientology doesn't invoke a theistic God, they can still be an atheist and be a Scientologist. And keep in mind, a religion does not necessarily mean you must be theist. There are various sects of Buddhism that are completely without theism, so atheistic in the very real sense. And there are Buddhists who are also Christians. So there are lots of Jews that are atheists because they are Jews based on their ethnicity, but not based on their beliefs. So atheism is not about the existence of religion, or necessarily a position opposing all religion, while many atheists do oppose all religion, like Christopher Hitchens was famous for. But atheism is specifically the lack of belief, or the belief that God or gods do not exist, and that all notions of God and or gods are false. And then Brent says, hypothetically, just because something is new, or at least newer than older concepts, doesn't make the older thing right. Sola Scriptura, as far as I'm concerned, is right as I understand it. Age, disregard, I'm not sure where you were going with that, but I will say this, yeah, the fact that, okay, so as far as Sola Scriptura is concerned, it has nothing to do with the age of the books. It has to do with the writers of the books and their relationship with God, right? Moses was God's first great prophet, and he wrote the huge swath of the Old Testament, right? Then you had people like the prophets themselves. And by the way, prophet doesn't mean a fortune teller. A prophet is simply a person who communes directly with God and speaks for God. And so when the prophets are writing, they're writing what God has told them to write. And then you have some books of the Bible that don't claim to be divine in nature, but are books of wisdom, like when we look at books like Proverbs, or, historical texts. And you see that in both the Old and New Testament. And so you need to look at the genre of each book. However, it is, when we look at the entirety of what we call the Bible, because remember, the Bible is a collection of some 66 or 72 books or whatever it is, depending on your particular belief system. You know, the one thing that these books have in common is that these are all people who interacted directly with God, the authors. And so we believe, at least, that these books are divinely inspired, meaning that God himself had a hand in their writing. Now, there is no evidence that Thomas Aquinas, or Pope John Paul II, or anybody else after the death of the last of the original apostles had that kind of relationship. Doesn't everything that killed Doomsday only make him stronger, so you would have to vaporize him or the Hulk to truly kill either one of them? You would, well, that's the thing, is that it depends on which version of Doomsday you're writing and that kind of thing. That's why I'm not a big fan of the unkillable characters, right? Because it takes the stakes out. If Doomsday always comes back just, able to adapt to whatever killed him the last time, then sure. But the problem is that the Hulk also is without limit, and so eventually their fight just goes on forever and ever. But as far as who wins in a straight-up brawl between the two at base level, I think Hulk wins. Where the Three Stooges where the Three Stooges really have superpowers, all things they survive would put a person in the hospital or kill them. Yes, the Three Stooges clearly had superhuman durability. That is true. Let's see. Death Battle said Hulk finally defeated an amalgamation, I assume, of different Godzillas mashed into one, even though it took Hulk several tries to actually beat him. So which means Godzilla beat Hulk several different times before Hulk got the win. Again, Death Battle is strictly for entertainment. I would not take their analyses too seriously. Tractor Viewer in the house says, hi, how you doing, buddy? The Hulk didn't win against Godzilla by himself, took him working with Banner and scientific knowledge to defeat Godzilla. Hulk versus Godzilla, I think that eventually Hulk would win. And just like if you look at Hulk versus Suitor, Hulk would have eventually won that fight, but Thor put a stop to it. Trek Reviewer says, what do you think of Star Trek Strange New World Season 4 so far? It's like the first episode was good, the second episode was interesting, but not scary. I thought both episodes were pretty good. Season's off to a decent start, but nothing groundbreaking or earth-shatteringly exciting yet. But I've enjoyed it for sure. And then Ariel says, yep, but they both lost to Godzilla several times for their victory. Again, going back to the Hulk versus Godzilla thing. But in the end, I think we all know that in the battle of Alex versus Darren Wagner, the world would just be a better place